Luke Arnold from MDOT is helping the Great Lakes Bentley User Group by putting on these 6 times a year these webinars to inform us of everything Bentley or MDOT. We appreciate him helping us out. Today he's going to go through some modeling tips and tricks. So if you have any questions during this webinar, just put them in the question and answer dialog box or the chat box. I'll monitor both of those. With that, Luke, why don't you go ahead and get started?
Yeah, thank you, Chuck. So like Chuck said, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Luke Arnold, and I'm the roadway modeling specialist with MDOT. And today, I'm just going to be going over kind of some, I guess, best practices specific to modeling overlays, as well as some unique areas that end up happening with end conditions. Some of the things that I've kind of just commonly seen when I was a road designer. And thank you, Chuck, again for having me. I always like putting these things on. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and get a DGN file. So if you have any questions as I'm working through, feel free to put it in the chat. I do have the chat up, monitoring that. Feel free to stop me at any time.
Sounds kind of like you got a bad connection or something.
The first thing that I wanted, let me check my audio settings. Do I just sound like far away?
You sound like a robot sometimes.
Okay, let me, I should have gotten off of MDOT's VPN. Just give me just a second. All right, can you still hear me okay, Chuck?
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about, I'm going to just cover some things to look out for when modeling overlays. And I'm not going to get into a ton of details as far as setting up a template or anything like that. But the first thing that I wanted to talk about is different ways that you can evaluate the existing cross slopes. So really this probably happens on any project, but especially on overlay projects where you're correcting the crown or something like that. So basically what I have in here, this is my corridor file, and I've just copied in my edge of pavement and my edge of shoulder lines from survey. These are in their own file, what I call a plan graphics file that's referenced in here. And if I open up my template library, I do already have a template set up, and it looks like I'm not connected to the workspace, but that's okay. We'll fix that later. We'll still be able to go through this. But this is just a really simple template. It's got points, different components for my lanes and for my shoulder. And if I go into the properties of these points, I have it set up to a default width of 12 feet. We're going to use a point control to override that. And my other second constraint that I have on all of these points is project to surface. So basically each one of these points, it's going to go and find the existing ground, and we'll be able to report on the existing slopes. So that's what I'm going to do here quickly. I'm going to be going through this kind of fast. So this is kind of geared towards, I guess, people who are really familiar with the roadway modeling process. So hopefully you'll be able to follow along okay. We'll make a new corridor, use the active profile. And for my template, I'm going to use that existing cross slopes template. And we'll go ahead from station 55 plus 00 down here to 68 plus 0 plus 00. And you can see my corridor model has been created here for me. And I like to use point controls to get these to follow the as surveyed lane lines. And so I'm actually just going to do this for the sake of time, just for one of the lane lines. And you'll see there's actually an issue with one of the reports that we're working on with Bentley. It's not in the workspace yet, but hopefully we'll have it fixed in the future. But I'll go ahead and make a new point control. Sorry for the colors being all red here. We'll get that fixed in a second. We'll do it for the whole corridor. We'll call it EOP left. And I want my left edge of pavement to horizontally follow with this edge of pavement left line that I've copied in from my survey. Click through the prompts and you'll see that it is now following along that survey line string. And one of the reports that we're working on with Bentley, this isn't actually in the workspace yet. And there's actually, it's not exactly reporting on things correctly at the moment. So, but I did want to show it to you because it will be in the workspace eventually. And it's actually really powerful. It's really cool, the things that you can do with it. If I click on my corridor, I can run what is called a results report. And in my workspace that I have here, I have my own, this is the report that is going to be added to the workspace at a future date. And you can see it's going to report on every component, the name of the component, and the slope and the width and the elevation. It's not actually reading this width property right at the moment. So it's something that we're working on with Bentley. One of the things actually that Chuck found out yesterday, if you do a file and a save as to send this to Excel, it only gives you an option. Hey, I'm not quite sure why. That's weird. The other day it was only showing XML. That's probably what you're going to see if you do a file save as. But as another option, if you just right click up here in the header of the report, you can export it to Microsoft Excel this way too.
Luke, I wonder if that's a workspace issue because you said you weren't in MDOT's workspace now, right?
Yeah, I wonder if it is. It's something, I'll make a mental note to check that out. So here now I have my report into my Excel file. And you can see the way that it's formatted right now, it's not exactly the most user-friendly, but anybody who doesn't know how to use Excel tables and Excel pivot tables, it's a really, really, really powerful way to be able to report on this stuff and show things the way that you want. That's kind of how the project quantity spreadsheet is set up. It's actually something I think we have on the list for possibly a future webinar, is looking at kind of some more advanced features of the PQS and how it's set up. But I'm going to do this really quickly. If it's something that you want to do, you can always reach out to CAD support and I can help you out. But if I do Control A, Control T, that's going to make this into an Excel table. And once it's formatted as an Excel table, you can make what's called the pivot table to summarize on this. I'll put it on a new worksheet. And what I want to see heat stations, I want to see components and slopes for all. And so now you have it set up in a little bit better format for actually looking at this. You can change the number format of these to make it like a station, but it just really walks along the cross section, left lane, right lane, shoulder left, shoulder right. And this is actually really cool, these pivot tables. You can also make pivot charts. So if I make a pivot chart, I can make a line chart. And now just really easily, you can see, in a graphical form what the slopes are doing. And you can even filter it. So if you're just concerned about the left lane, you can just look at the left lane and you can see, what the existing cross slope is doing throughout the limits of the project. So that's really cool. Like I said, it's not reporting on the widths properly at the moment. And so all of these slopes that you see here are actually not correct, but we are working on it with Bentley. It'll be in the workspace eventually. We'll close out of Excel. I wanted to show there is actually another way that, you can report on existing cross slopes, and that is to use cross sections. So if I go to my drawing production tab and place some named boundaries for cross sections. Let's see. We want a civil cross section. The drawing sheet, it doesn't even really matter. We're not actually going to be cutting any cross section sheets. But if I just lay out a bunch of these name boundaries throughout the project, I can go to my home tab, and under civil analysis, we can do a cross-section report. And this is a different report that just looks at the cross sections. My group is going to be the name of that group of all those sheets that I just laid out. I want to report on the top features. And you'll see the options that I have here. It's not formatted quite as nicely as that other report. but you can still see each station where we cut a cross section. It's kind of the same thing. It walks across the cross section and gives you, the slope for each one of these. So you could send this out to Excel and manipulate it this way too to get what you want. This is probably your best option for what's in the workspace right now, but hopefully sometime in the next few weeks we'll be able to add that other report, because that's pretty cool. And by the way, that other report, it'll report on anything that is not a closed component, and so you could even use it for things like end conditions. See how your end conditions are changing throughout the project. I think there could be a lot of use cases for it. It's pretty cool. The next thing that I wanted to talk about, just briefly, when modeling overlays, I'm just going to delete this corridor. I don't need it anymore. And I am going to delete these named boundaries as well. Is keeping an eye out for how often your corridor is processing. Oftentimes when we're matching existing conditions, especially if it's using the existing ground as the profile, or using point controls to control things from survey lines, your template ends up processing at all kinds of extra stations. And what this leads to for downstream users is really big line string files and XML files. And if they get above a certain size, oftentimes surveyors and other people, they'll just have trouble even loading it up to their equipment, because there's just too many points in that file. So I'm going to go ahead and place another corridor and show one way that you can get around all of those extra stations. And it's also going to help you in design, because things will process a little bit faster. So I'm going to place another new corridor. In this case, I have just a 2-lane to 3-lane widening template, and it doesn't really matter the station range that I pick here. But you'll see what ends up happening. In my case, I'm using the existing ground as my planned grade line in this case. Turn off some of these layers. And so if I change my feature definition to be, let's see. Sorry about this. I'm going to have to close and reopen this file quickly. Just to get it connected to the workspace. This is going to take me a minute because I'm not on VPN, so it's going to take just a minute while I log into ProjectWise. If there's any questions, feel free to use the chat. Somebody once told me to never go live.
Of course. While we're waiting, I record every webinar and we'll upload it to our YouTube channel. When that happens, I'll send a link to everybody that's a member of the group.
Okay, this should work now. I was connected to the workspace before the webinar started, and I noticed something in another file, and I activated the reference just to move something. And when I deactivated the reference, like all of my workspace was goofed up. I've never seen that before. You can set it up to follow the Z as well. We have a question in the chat. If you use a point control to move something to follow a survey line, does it follow the Z as well? When you create the point control, you have the option to follow it horizontally, vertically, or both. So you can do it either way. In my case, I just use the template to project it to the surface because that's what I wanted, but you could have it follow the Z component as well. So I'm going to turn off my wedging component here just to clean things up a little bit. And let me get my corridor level back on. So this looks okay right now when I'm at my the current design stage, the feature definition with my corridor. But if I go and change this to be a final feature definition where it's processing every 5 feet, you'll see that I'm going to have all kinds of extra stations where my template is going to be processing. So we have all of these intermediate points, and when we send these out to an XML file at the end of the project in the line string file, all of these extra points, they're really not necessary, and they make the file really, really big and makes it difficult for downstream users to use. And so this is something that I'm probably going to add to the workspace at one point, is a feature definition specific for modeling overlays. So anytime you use a feature definition, it copies that feature definition into your file, and it gives you access to that feature definition to change things. Generally shouldn't be needed. Everything should be set correctly in the workspace, but there are cases where you can come in here and change these. So here I have my corridor feature definition for 5-final. And if I go into the properties, you'll see that we have different ways that we can control how often this thing is processing. And here's my properties. So you see here in this field, we have process and critical stations. These are all things that are available to be changed. So horizontal cardinal points, that's things like your PC and your PT on a curve. Vertical cardinal points, this is the one that's getting me right now. Basically every little triangle in the existing ground, it's going to process at, it's going to consider that a cardinal point. And right now I'm using the existing ground as my planned grade line. So if I set this to false and reprocess my corridor, you'll see that it will take away a few of those. So that'll de-densify it a little bit. I lost my properties here. If we go back to the Explorer and take a look at this feature definition again, I'm going to unpin this. Another one that we have here is densify vertical. We can set that to false, and that will really clean this up so that it's only processing every 5 feet. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get another feature definition into the workspace specific for modeling overlays. So you can see now this thing is processing every 5 feet. You're not going to have all of those extra vertices and all of the points. And when you think about it, you don't really need all of those extra vertices when you're modeling an overlay. If I copy my edge of pavement here, you see that the survey that we have here, in my case, it's cross sections every 50 feet. So we have cross sections every 50 feet, but we're modeling, every 5 feet. I guess I just don't see how much benefit there really is to having all of those extra points in there. So just something to be aware of, something to look out for. I know it's happened on a lot of projects, and it's not something that's easy to really fix after the fact. So just pay attention as you're going through the modeling process and taking a look at how often things are processing and keeping in mind, downstream users who are using the data. The next thing that I wanted to show is a few things that I've run across with end conditions. And I've got a couple of different projects. It's actual project data, past projects that I've worked on, and just how I've gotten around kind of some unique situations. So the first one that I am going to show is a project that I worked on down in the Detroit TSC. And this was actually a really interesting project. It was a pretty small project. You can see here the corridor that I have. That was basically the limits of the project. We'll see if Bing Maps is going to cooperate with me, just so you can see where, get an idea of where this project is at. So this is right down by the Detroit riverfront. The Detroit TSC is just a couple of blocks away over here. It's on M85 Fort Street. And the scope of this project was to remove this bridge. It goes over an old railroad line, and we were going to put it back with a road. So basically this old railroad line, it was abandoned. The railroad company had no vested interest in it. So basically like 20 feet of fill to fill in this roadway. And the cross section that I'm looking at down here, you can see this is basically where the bridge used to be. I don't have all of my end conditions shown here, but we're filling this whole area in with dirt instead of a bridge. And at the specific cross section that I am at, in this case, you can see my end condition. This is actually the old bridge barrier wall. Well, this thing is getting removed. So when I'm going through my modeling process, I don't want my end condition to tie in at the back of this barrier wall. I want it to keep going and shooting down, because that's, in the end, that's what's getting built. I don't want it to tie in right here. And so I just wanted to show quickly the method that I use to get around this. So I'm going to go into my template library for this corridor. And you can see here, this is M85. Well, what I ended up doing in this situation is, instead of having an end condition that started here and search down, I actually made an end condition way down here to search up for the existing ground rather than searching down from the top. And that's one method that you can use for situations like this. So if I delete my component down here, I'm just going to add a new null point, and we'll put it down here. Just call it end condition null point. In my case, I have a 1-on-4 slope, so I'm going to project this vertically in a slope from my hinge point back here. We'll make it like way down there, 30 feet at a 1-on-4 slope. And hopefully, let's see if I got my slope right. I did. I get my positives and negatives mixed up a lot in here.
It's not 25% though, Luke.
What did it end up at?
Well, when you change it,
yeah, 25%. There we go. Now it's in the right spot. Thank you, Chuck. So I'm going to go into my end conditions and pick a cut slope. I pick a cut slope because it's going from the bottom up rather than the top down. And in my case, I have a 1-on-4 cut slope that I want to put in here. So this end condition is going to search from down here, and it's going to search up for the existing ground rather than searching down. And I'm going to add a new component, put it on the right feature definition for my slope, give it a name. And I'm going to connect from my hinge point down to this end condition. And I don't want it to be closed, so it's just a regular component. So I can save this and close out of it. And if I synchronize my template, you'll see what happens here is now, instead of, well, right now I'm going to have two components. So I have one, my end condition here, that is searching down and going up, and then I have another duplicate component coming from the top and connecting at this point down here. So it's a way to find kind of the last solution of the end condition if you do have multiple, you want it to hit the existing ground at a different location. And what I ended up doing, I think there's probably a better method to do this, but I just take this component down here and set it to a feature definition that I don't want to show up in my model. So on a scratch or on a do not construct feature definition. So if I save that, I can close out of it. And if I synchronize my template again, you should see that What did I do? I know what I did. This component down here, I want to make sure that this is set to end condition as infinite, so it's going to search forever. And now when I synchronize my template, you should see, hopefully, the right thing. So now you have it. So we have our do not construct component that's searching from the bottom, and our other component is going to find it from the top. So just kind of a unique thing. It's something I've ran across a couple of times, and that's just one method that you can use to find that second solution. The next thing that I wanted to talk about, it's something that Chuck brought up. It's pretty common where if you have a fill slope and your end condition is tying in, you have something goofy going on your shoulder where your end condition is tying in way up here. That's not actually what you want. You actually want to daylight your material out to the end. And so I'm going to show that in a different project directory. I believe it's this corridor right here. And I'm going to come to the front of this corridor. I'm going to temporarily turn my 3D model view on so you can kind of see what's going on. I'll turn on all of these levels. And I'm just going to take a look at the cross sections for this area. Give it a minute to load up these cross sections. And we'll try to find an area where the issue is occurring. I'm still here. My computer is just a little slow. I'm going to jump up approximately to this station 117 plus 00. I think the design file is still struggling to open, being a little slow on me. So you can see what's happening in this area. Basically, I have a 1-on-4 fill slope, and I'm not doing any ditching work in this particular cross section. So I just have a 1-on-4 fill slope coming here, and our daylight is projecting out to meet that end condition. And if I go back just one station, you'll see that my end condition now, it's tying in too soon to this slope over here. Really what I want to have happen is I want this thing to daylight all the way out. And I could do stuff like I could use parametric constraints to change the slope to make it a little bit shallower. But oftentimes what happens there is it gets too shallow and you end up, filling in a piece of the ditch, which I don't want to do in this situation either. So a lot of times what my method is to handle situations like this is to use the slope tie lines. So if I go into my template library for this project, I believe it's actually in a different template library. So we'll open that up. Should be in here. The template that I'm using, in this case, I just have a separate right side template for my end conditions just for simplicity's sake to show in here. But you could have this as part of your main template too. But generally my strategy for end conditions, I don't know if I'll ever have a good strategy that really solves everything. End conditions, as I'm sure everybody knows who's gone through a project, are oftentimes the fussiest part of the model to get what you want. But generally what I do is I'll just have one slope. I might have a cut option and a fill option depending on the project, but you can control this even with just a parametric constraint. But I'll just have one slope. And for areas where things are happening that I don't really want to happen, I'll have these slope tie lines. So these are actually in the workspace today. If I go to my components, if I go into my end conditions, we have these special end conditions called universal tie line. So that is what I have brought into this file. I actually brought in the universal tie line, right? So just something to be aware of with end conditions. If I double click this component, we have different options for the target for what we actually want to find. So for my target type here, when I double click that end condition, generally we're going to be searching for a terrain model. So we're going to be searching for the existing ground in many cases, but you can also target a certain elevation. So if I wanted this 1-on-4 slope to go down until it got to elevation, 645, I could do that. You can also target feature definitions or linear geometry. That's basically the different options that we have here. In this case, we are following a feature definition. So our corridor is going to look for a feature definition called slope tie down right. And anything that we draw in that feature definition, if we add it to the corridor, it's going to fill in those areas. So I didn't make any changes to the template library, so I don't have to save it. Basically, that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to pick a feature definition for slope tie down right. If it'll let me. Linear slope tie down right. And I'm just going to offset my alignment using the civil geometry tools. So we'll do a horizontal single offset partial. And I think the number that I'm looking for is 50 feet. It doesn't really matter. It's all dynamic, right? So you can always change it after the fact. And we want it to go, you can see I was already playing in this file. It's already got the right station there, 117.05. I do need to give this line a profile. I want it to tie down with the existing ground. So I'm just going to give this a profile of the existing ground line. And in my corridor, I need to add this line as a corridor reference. So if I go to my corridor, I can add a corridor reference. I want to add it to this corridor, my slope tie down line. And you'll see that now my slope is just going to match. Did I pick the wrong feature definition? P slope tie down, right? Maybe I got to process this corridor. You do have to keep an eye on the priorities here. So this is priority 0. Hopefully this slope should be priority 1, and it is. I'm not sure exactly what is happening here, but what is supposed to happen is my slope stake line should just jump out and follow exactly on this line. Maybe it's part of the other corridor. Corridor reference. You can try to add it again. Well, I'm not exactly sure, unfortunately. There's something going on here. That's all right. We can move on. It is processing now. Maybe it'll go now that it's processing again. But what ends up happening in this situation is you will end up with like a 1-on-4 or flatter slope in this instance. And I know that the design reviewers don't necessarily like to see that, but at the end of the day, that's really what's going to get built. They're gonna daylight this out, and whatever this slope is, that's what it is. Maybe it wasn't added. We'll try to add it again. There it goes. Now it's doing what I want. So if I put a temporary horizontal dimension on this, you'll see that, yeah, this thing's behaving funny, but this slope it's going to be a 1-on-4 or flatter, and it's going to be constantly changing as I go along. But I'll just pick an offset that's slightly outside of where I want it to daylight it to, and whatever my slope is, my slope is. Obviously, you still need to go through and check things, make sure it's not getting too steep. There might be some instances where this tie line isn't going to work, but a lot of times that's my methodology for end conditions. I just have one solution that I'll control with a parametric constraint, and I'll have this forced kind of slope tie line for any kind of unique areas.
Hey, Luke, can you quickly go back to that template and
Yeah, yep.
tell us how the tie line is tied into the end of the slope?
So it's part of this end condition property. So if I double click on this end condition, the component, we have different options here for the target. So we have it set up in the workspace that this is going to look for a feature definition, and the feature definition that it's going to look for is P slope tie down right. So anything that I draw on this feature definition, P slope tie down right, if I add it to the corridor as a corridor reference, as long as you have your priority set up right, if you look, this is priority 0 and this is priority 1. So when the template processes, the first thing it's going to do is it's going to check to see priority 0. So is there a feature definition P slope tie down right that is added as a corridor reference? If it sees that, this is the end condition that's going to solve. If it doesn't see that feature definition, then it's going to do the 1-on-4 slope. And I guess another thing that I have in here, we have kind of a special constraint on this daylight point. I have it going at a 2% slope. And the second constraint, I have it project to the closest end condition. So I could have many, many different end conditions, and it's always going to tie in to the closest end condition. So it's either going to tie into P slope tie down, or it's going to tie into 1-on-4 fill slope. So
okay, that's what I was questioning.
Yeah, it's just kind of a method that I use to so that I don't have to duplicate this component. Otherwise, I'd have to have two components, one that ties into the 1-on-4 slope and one that ties into the tie down line. So
awesome, thanks.
Yep. There are situations where doing it this way won't always work, but I try to default to that just because it makes the template a little bit simpler. You don't have a bunch of stuff hidden. The next kind of area that I wanted to show, and this is going to be, I think, the last thing that I'm really talking about with end conditions, is up here in this gore area. So I am going to turn off, I don't think I need the 3D model view anymore, just because it's getting in the way. And I'm going to turn off my construction class elements just so we can kind of see what's going on here. And I'm going to jump to up here, station 148. I'm going to actually go back a little more. We'll go to 147. So right now I have two models that are referenced into my file. I have my ramp model and I have my mainline model. And I have a situation here where I have two different ditches that are running together. And I think I tried to get this set up right. There's something going on with one of the profiles, so it's not actually going to be accurate, but with as far as the modeling goes. But what we got going on is we basically have two ditches that are running together. So we have water flowing this way, we have water flowing this way. And, you know, we might have a low point down here in this area where we have a culvert that goes either across here or maybe to the outside. But basically what I want to show you is a method that you can use to tie up this area in here. So here we have our ramp ditch, and it's just going to go find the existing ground. It's doing what I told it to do. It's going and finding the existing ground. And the same thing with this component here, we have another ditch. But what I really want to happen in this situation, I think my ditch is a little bit too deep on this ramp, but it should be okay. We'll still be able to demonstrate what this does. I want my main line to go and tie in right here, and I want the ramp to do the same thing. So we have two separate ditches kind of with a little berm in between. And the method that I like to use in this situation is it's called target aliasing, where basically you can tell your end conditions. There's different ways that you can use target aliasing, but in this instance, I'm going to use it to tell my end conditions, don't find the existing ground, go out and find this ramp B model instead. So I'm going to turn my constructions back on so we can access our corridor. If I go to the corridor part of the ribbon, you see there's this option here, define target aliasing. So I want to define target aliasing on my ditch corridor. And basically what the aliases are in this instance is what do you want me to find first? So in this area, I want it to first find my ramp B corridor. If you can't find the ramp B corridor, go out and find the terrain model. So it's kind of prioritizing what the end conditions are actually searching for. If I press apply, you'll see that my model is going to update here. And you see now my ditch is tying into ramp B rather than tying into the existing ground. So that's one way that you can use target aliasing. Now, when you have two corridors coming together like this, you're always going to define target aliasing on one corridor, and you're going to have to clip the other corridor. So if I go to my ramp B corridor, in this file, the target aliasing you can see in my cross section here is working for my main line, and we're just going to have to clip the ramp B corridor. And usually I'll clip the ramp B corridor around the other corridor, if that makes sense. You'll see in just a second. So now I'm in my ramp corridor. I'm going to open up my dynamic sections here just so we can get to that same area, make sure it's going to do what I want it to do. So see, we got a lot of stuff not quite matching up here, but we'll go to 246 plus 50. 246 plus 50. And I'm just going to add a clipping reference. So here under corridor clipping, I can add a new clipping reference. I want to clip my ramp B corridor, and we can actually choose the my other corridor as a clipping reference. So that's what I'm going to do. I just picked the other mainline corridor, and you should see, it didn't quite work. I think I have a level turned off. See what's on in here. So let's try that again. Model detailing. No, corridors. Bear with me, my computer's catching up. Corridor clipping. We want to clip the ramp B corridor around my mainline corridor, which should be this one right here. And my computer is being awfully slow to catch up. So we'll probably leave that demonstration there, but basically the idea is when you use target aliasing, you're going to define target aliasing on one corridor, and you're always going to have to clip the other corridor. You can't have two target aliasing that are targeting themselves, basically. And what you would see is, you'd have two nice ditches and a little berm area in between.
Hey, Luke, David has a question. Does the clipping cause any issues with the feature definitions like it did in GeoPack? I don't recall doing that, but.
Yeah, there are some instances. Can you still hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So, something just happened with, I have my whole setup here plugged into a smart plug so I can turn off all my computers at night. And for some reason it just shut up. So my screens are coming back. But to answer your question, no, I haven't seen too many issues with corridor clipping in Open Roads Designer causing issues with feature definitions. When you do clip corridors, you never want to clip a corridor completely in half. That is one area where it's going to cause weird things to happen in your 3D model. It's a lot more stable in Open Roads Designer. But one thing that I will make people, I guess, aware of is that if you do a lot of corridor clipping, hold on, I'm trying to drag this screen back over. Did you guys lose the share? You probably did.
Yeah, there's no share.
Yeah, I'll get it back.
There's also
So
a couple
if you do
of questions if you want to tackle those after this one.
Yep. If you do a lot of corridor clipping, it does slow down processing time a lot. And because it slows down processing time so much, you might notice that we actually have separate feature definitions for the corridor, some that honor clipping and some that don't. So you can see my design stage here is set to no clipping, which is probably why you can't see the clipping. But if I change this to the final 1x, then it should include that clipping reference and the clip will show. So something new that is in Open Roads Designer that was not in the software previous to this. And you can see my model now, it is working where it's stopping at the right location. Sorry, I'm trying to, my whole setup here got reset when I lost that. So I'm trying to find the chat back.
So Mike says, so the point at which they meet would essentially act as a berm. Normally berms have a flatter ridge. Is there a way to model that, or would it not matter?
You could, I would have to think about it. There's certainly a way to model it. Probably what I would do potentially is in your template, well, you could tell it to search for a specific elevation, but you might be able to, you know, if you drew the berm in plan view, you might be able to use, you know, instead of using the target aliasing, how I just showed it, you might have to, you know, physically draw the berm and maybe use a point control or something like that to get it to fill in how you want to. There, I finally got the chat back open. Did I miss any other questions?
Yeah, there's the last one from James.
If you trace the joint in 3D, you can have the other model tied to that point after the target aliasing, and then it maintains your point definitions. I think that's just more a piece of information. Okay. I am going to go back to my northbound corridor real quick. And I just wanted to show another methodology for filling in that area between the ditches. So we have, I'm going to open up the 3D view here. So we have our end conditions for the ditch here. We have our end conditions for the ditch here. It looks like, I'm not sure what happened when I changed the feature definition here. I want to turn off that level. So we have this area in between where there's nothing there right now, right? So we have our ditch here. We have our ditch here. Maybe I will keep that other mesh turned on. I'm not sure why it turned that kind of odd color. Yeah, something's going on with my XS features. That's okay. Really, the point is, you know, how do you fill in areas like this that are kind of between corridors? And what I like to do in situations like this is I actually won't even put a surface template or anything like that in this area. You definitely could, but at the end of the day, the most valuable thing for people who are going to be using this downstream is having accurate brake lines, and really that's it. It's brake lines and surfaces. That's what you know, contractors and surveyors are concerned with. That's the data that they're going to be using. It's nice to have this pretty cross-section model where you can look at all the cross sections and report on different parts of the feature of the corridor. But for areas like this, basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my horizontal geometry tools, and I might draw a curve instead of a line, but I'm going to connect this point to this point, and I'm going to connect this point to this point, and I'm going to play around with different profiles. And once you give it a profile, they'll show up in the 3D view. And you can also, you know, wherever you choose to model this area, I'd probably do it in a different file. I would use those brake lines as part of the final kind of, you know, surface model creation, if you will. So I'm not going to put any surface template in here just to get the nice, pretty, grass looking area. If you did have to, if you were producing a model, maybe for something where visualization was important, where you're going to a public meeting or you have some kind of cool reality model, then I might fill it in with a surface template. But for design purposes, I'm not even going to bother. I'm going to get the break lines in there and make sure the slopes work and stuff like that. But that's basically my methodology for filling in areas like this. Are there any other questions or anything else? We are running up against the end of it. I did want to finish off with just a couple of things to look out for when you're preparing final RID deliverables. And I actually don't have any files prepared, so I'm just going to show you different areas to look out for. I'm not seeing anything in the chat, so this worked out pretty well. I got through actually everything I wanted to show, even in spite of some of the issues like this. So the first thing I wanted to show, and by the way, I do have plans for the future to have basically a RID deliverables class where we walk through how to go through all of the different types of deliverables. I'm not sure when I'm going to have time to get to that, but it is something that is on my list as kind of a higher priority item. But one of the things that often happens, especially if you use a lot of display rules, is you end up with line strings on top of line strings, and they're exactly on top of each other. And you actually can't even really know that they're there. Oftentimes it happens like with the slope stake line, just due to the way that the software works. So one of the things when you're preparing your final RID deliverables is you always want to go to, this is for line strings specifically, so the 3D break lines. If you go to the drawing workflow, under utilities, we have these file cleanup utilities. You can also search for it up in the ribbon, design file cleanup. So it'll show up here if you forget where it's at. But this gives you some options to search in the file for duplicates and overlaps and gaps. And generally, you're going to want all of those to be 0. And there's not a good way to really clean things up other than doing it by hand. But having overlaps in the file, it's something that really it basically makes the 3D lines kind of unusable for contractors. You don't want any overlaps. In the duplicates, from what I've heard, they're not as much of an issue. But if you have a lot of duplicates, again, it's going to make your design file really, really large, and it'll be a struggle to import it into any other like survey equipment. So you have some options here to select or to delete. Usually I'll press select and then press apply. It's probably not going to find anything in this case. So it did. It found 40 duplicates somewhere in this file. I'm not sure where they're at, but it did select them. So they're selected right now. So you could go ahead and delete those. So just something to be aware of. Always check for the gaps and overlaps. And the other thing that commonly happens with RID files for surfaces is they don't have any boundary associated with them. So I'm going to go in my 3D view. I'm going to go to the top view, and I'm just going to make a really quick surface here. And actually, this is something that's in the workspace too that I think some people know about, but maybe not all people. If I go to the MDOT customizations, we have these sheet view filters. And what the sheet view filters do, if I open up the levels and go to the filters, it gives you different options here for the different surfaces that you might want to create. So if I pick top surface, it's going to turn everything off except for break lines that are typically a part of the top surface. And I will always go back to the levels and just check these to make sure that it got all the right ones. It's not perfect. Like in this case, I want the travelway concrete edge on everywhere. But it gets you pretty close as far as setting up the levels that you want. And I'm just going to select all of my elements here and create a terrain model from them, from elements. So the standard process, if I go to my levels, and I would just want to turn on my terrain model here. So oftentimes what'll happen with these terrain models, I'm going to change my properties here to be like a 250 max triangle length, is you end up with a lot of exterior triangles. So if I go to my properties and turn my triangles on, you'll see this area between the slope stake lines. It is creating a surface. It is triangulating between those areas. And, you know, it's just part of the design process to go in and clean up those triangles. But after you clean up the triangles, you need to make sure you go to the corridor terrain part of the ribbon. And up here in feature management, first we need to create a boundary. So extract graphic, I'll pick my terrain model, extract graphic, and that will make a 3D break line. Let's see if I can pick it. Turn off my triangles. That will make a 3D break line around the boundary of my terrain model. And after it's created, you want to make sure you go into feature management and actually add that as a boundary. Otherwise, when the surface gets brought into some other piece of survey equipment, those exterior triangles are going to show up. And when you only have the surface to go off of, you don't have all the 3D break lines, you just have the surface. So it looks like this is part of your design surface, and it's really not. So just another thing I think that commonly gets seen in the RID process is not having these boundaries applied to the terrain models. So that's just two things to check in your final preparation. Always check for duplicates and overlaps, and always add a boundary to your terrain model. And that pretty much takes me to the last thing that I wanted to cover. So we're getting pretty close to 12:30, but I am open to sticking around if there are a lot of additional questions.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. So Luke, for this boundary, then when you display the triangles, first you got to unlock it, right? So you can clean up the triangles.
Yeah, yep. So to clean them up, you would deactivate the rules, and then you have these edit model. I usually like to use this one. I'll just pick the terrain model, delete a bunch of triangles. I will say there is a better way to getting the boundary in Open Roads Designer. Let me show that real quick. I'm just going to delete this terrain model out here. So there's a new option. It's not going to let me delete it. There we go. There's a new option in ORD in the additional methods to create terrain models. You can create it from design meshes. And I want to pick the top surface. I'm just going to click through the prompts here. It does take a little while to go through, but it's actually going to follow, it's going to hug your corridor perfectly if you do it this way. So oftentimes this is where I'll get my boundary from. Now this surface isn't adequate for creating your final line strings because it creates it from the meshes. It doesn't create it from the 3D lines, but you can see this is hugging exactly along my slope stake line. So oftentimes I'll do this, extract the boundary from this, and then pick the actual break lines for the terrain model creation, and then use this as my boundary. So just avoids a little bit of cleanup that you might have to do.
So that's, you can use that quickly to quickly get your slope stake line.
Yeah, you could. Yeah. Basically, it just hugs everything that's on top in your model. And like I said, it makes it from the meshes, not from the 3D lines. So if I turn everything on in the 3D model, you know, it's picking these, not the lines. It's picking the surface.
Right. Awesome. Well, I don't think there's no other questions, so probably end it at that. There's one in the Q&A. How can you clip a void in the surface? Example location would be the interior of a loop ramp.
So you can add, I think it finds voids automatically. So like in this loop ramp here, you know, you might have a model for here and then another model for the road, and it might try to fill in everything on the inside. There are some tools in the terrain part where you can add extra features. So if I wanted to add a feature, I could add a hole or a void from here. I'm not sure what the best method would be to do it, if it would be just drawing the void that you want to appear on the surface, or if there's some better ways to do it. But that's where you would go to the feature management. So you can go here and add, well, that minimized it. You can add all right. I don't think I'm seeing anything else. So thanks again, Chuck, for putting this together. And I hope that people found some value in today's webinar.
Yeah, thanks again, Luke, for putting us on. And thanks everybody for joining, and keep an eye out for future emails on future webinars. So with that, we'll go ahead and end it. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Luke.